There is a peculiar paradox that defines the inner life of the Sigma man, a contradiction so subtle that it often goes unnoticed even by the one living it. The more capable he becomes, the less inclined he is to recognize it. Unlike men who depend on external validation, titles, applause, recognition, or the constant reassurance of others, the Sigma man moves through life quietly, measuring himself not against the shifting standards of society, but against an internal code that rarely speaks in praise. He does not announce his progress or perform his discipline for an audience. He does not narrate his suffering, nor does he dramatize his resilience. His growth unfolds in silence. And while this silence is the source of his strength, it is also his blind spot. What comes naturally to him feels ordinary precisely because it is deeply integrated. Remaining calm under pressure, enduring isolation without resentment, walking away from chaos without needing to dominate or be seen as victorious. These are not skills he showcases, but instincts embedded into his nervous system. Where other men measure themselves through comparison, the Sigma man measures himself through conscience. And conscience is quiet, demanding alignment rather than offering praise. It does not stop to applaud progress. It simply raises the standard again. Over time, this creates a subtle psychological effect. Many Sigma men carry a muted sense of inadequacy, not because they lack value, but because they are always oriented toward refinement rather than reflection. They correct more than they celebrate. They improve more than they acknowledge. In a modern world that rewards visibility, noise, and constant self-promotion, the Sigma man's power develops in the opposite direction. His strength compounds inwardly. His identity stabilizes privately. His confidence is structural, not performative. And because there is little external reaction to this internal evolution, a quiet illusion forms. If no one is reacting, nothing significant must be happening. But silence is not absence. It is compression. What is forming beneath the surface does not need witnesses to be real. This is not flattery nor motivation, but an explanation, an examination of why many high-value Sigma men underestimate themselves, not due to ignorance, but because their awareness operates on a deeper, quieter frequency. Let us examine this quietly. Point 1, Sigma men normalize what is rare. The first and perhaps most subtle reason Sigma men struggle to see their own greatness is that they normalize what is, in truth, exceptionally rare. Human beings adjust quickly to their internal environment. Whatever becomes familiar begins to feel ordinary, regardless of its objective value. The Sigma man adapts early to pressure, solitude, and responsibility. He learns to regulate his emotions, not because it is praised, but because it is necessary. Over time, emotional self-control stops feeling like a strength and starts feeling like a baseline requirement for functioning. This psychological adaptation is efficient, but it creates invisibility. When a man routinely absorbs stress without collapse, navigates isolation without resentment, and makes decisions without emotional dependency, he begins to assume that this must be how all men operate. He forgets how rare emotional restraint actually is. He forgets how uncommon it is to remain stable without constant reassurance. The Sigma man does not feel exceptional because his nervous system has calibrated itself to high demand. What once required effort now feels automatic. This is the paradox of internal mastery. Once a skill is embodied, it disappears from conscious awareness. Greatness is no longer experienced as effort. It becomes structure, and structure feels invisible to the one living inside it. Most men live in reaction. The Sigma man lives in regulation. But because regulation is quiet, it produces no internal celebration. He does not experience triumph, only continuity. As a result, his achievements feel smaller than they are, not because they lack significance, but because they no longer require struggle. In psychological terms, this is hedonic adaptation applied to discipline. The Sigma man's capacity expands, but his perception does not recalibrate upward. He continues to judge himself by the effort required, not by the level of difficulty he routinely handles. This is why Sigma men often underestimate themselves. They confuse familiarity with insignificance. They mistake adaptation for mediocrity. But what feels normal to a disciplined nervous system is often extraordinary to an undisciplined one. Point 2. They measure themselves internally, not socially. The second reason lies in how Sigma men evaluate their own worth. Most men measure themselves externally. They look for social indicators: approval, admiration, hierarchy, and visible success markers. These signals act as mirrors. They tell a man where he stands relative to others. Sigma men, however, do not rely on mirrors. Their evaluation system is internal. They measure alignment, not applause. They ask themselves whether they acted correctly, not whether they were noticed, whether they maintained discipline, not whether they were rewarded. This internal measurement system is stable, but it is also unforgiving. An internal judge does not congratulate easily. It does not exaggerate progress. It simply notes deviation and correction. Because of this, Sigma men often experience their lives as a series of adjustments rather than achievements. Each improvement immediately becomes the new standard. There is no pause for recognition. The internal compass keeps moving forward. Psychologically, this creates a sense of perpetual incompletion, even when the Sigma man is operating at a level far above average. His internal reference point has already shifted. He sees only the next refinement, the next inefficiency, and the next area to improve. This is why Sigma men often feel behind despite being ahead. Their metric is not comparative, it is aspirational. They do not ask, "Am I better than most?" They ask, "Am I fully aligned?" And alignment is an asymptote. You approach it, but you never fully arrive. Without external validation to interrupt this loop, the Sigma man remains in a constant state of self-correction. This is productive, but it obscures progress. When progress is measured against an internal ideal rather than an external group, it rarely feels complete. Greatness becomes a moving target, always slightly ahead of where the Sigma man stands. Point 3, silence masks impact. The third factor is the Sigma man's indirect influence, a form of power that operates without spectacle and therefore escapes his own perception. His impact is rarely loud or immediate because he does not dominate conversations, seek validation, or impose himself socially. Instead, he alters environments through presence rather than assertion. His calm recalibrates tense rooms without explanation. His silence lowers emotional volatility. His refusal to overreact quietly establishes a different rhythm that others unconsciously adjust to. When he withdraws, the absence he creates is not emptiness, but contrast. And that contrast forces reflection. People begin to notice what changed only after he's gone. His boundaries, rarely announced or defended with words, silently restructure social dynamics by defining what will and will not be tolerated. Yet these effects unfold slowly and quietly, often outside his conscious awareness. Because Sigma men do not seek reaction, they rarely receive feedback. There is no applause, no confrontation, and no visible acknowledgement that something shifted. Power that operates indirectly does not announce itself. Psychologically, humans are conditioned to recognize influence through immediate response. When someone reacts, agrees, resists, or mirrors us, the brain registers impact. When there is no reaction, the mind assumes there was no effect at all, but this is a false inference. The Sigma man's presence often registers later, internally within others. After emotional defenses have dropped and comparison begins, he becomes a reference point rather than a participant, a silent standard against which others measure their own behavior, composure, and authenticity. People do not always remember what he said, but they remember how they felt in his presence and how different that state was from their norm. Because this influence does not loop back in real time, the Sigma man remains unaware of it. He interprets quiet as irrelevance and distance as invisibility. In reality, it is often absorption. Influence that reshapes thought rather than behavior takes time to surface because it bypasses resistance and works beneath conscious processing. The Sigma man's mistake is assuming that power must be visible to be real, dramatic to be effective, or acknowledged to be valid. But the most stable forms of authority do not compete for attention. They operate below the surface, altering internal frameworks rather than external reactions. They change the structure, not the noise, and structures endure long after the sound fades. Point 4, they are oriented toward refinement, not identity. The fourth reason Sigma men struggle to see their greatness lies in their orientation toward refinement rather than identity, a subtle psychological stance that shapes how they relate to themselves over time. Many men build their sense of self around fixed traits, defining themselves as strong, successful, intelligent, or dominant. And once these labels are adopted, they become mental anchors that reinforce confidence through repetition. Sigma men resist this instinct almost instinctively. They avoid clinging to labels, even flattering ones, because they view identity as something fluid, provisional, and always under construction. To them, declaring who they are feels premature, even limiting. This resistance keeps them grounded and adaptive, but it also creates a form of self-blindness. When a man refuses to solidify his identity, he avoids arrogance and complacency, yet he also sidesteps recognition of his own development. The Sigma man's attention is not directed toward who he has become, but toward what still requires refinement. His mind is trained to scan for inefficiencies, weaknesses, and areas of potential improvement, not as an act of self-criticism, but as a practical orientation toward growth. Over time, this habitual focus produces a distorted internal map. Flaws remain vivid because they demand correction, while strengths fade into the background because they no longer require conscious effort. Psychologically, attention determines salience. Whatever the mind repeatedly focuses on feels larger, more important, and more defining. Because Sigma men focus on refinement, imperfection occupies the foreground of their awareness, even when their overall competence is high. This is not insecurity in the conventional sense, nor is it self-denial. It is a byproduct of conscientiousness and internal discipline. The Sigma man does not dismiss his abilities because he doubts them, but because he finds no immediate utility in affirming what already functions well. His internal dialogue is oriented toward optimization rather than validation, toward process rather than proclamation. In this way, his greatness becomes operational rather than symbolic. It exists in action, consistency, and quiet effectiveness, but not as a narrative he tells himself. As a result, his strengths are lived rather than celebrated, embodied rather than observed. His greatness is real and active, but it remains peripheral to his conscious identity, not because it is absent, but because his attention is always one step ahead, focused on the next refinement rather than the ground already mastered. Point 5, solitude removes mirrors. The fifth factor is solitude, and it is perhaps the most quietly influential force shaping how the Sigma man perceives himself. Sigma men spend extended periods alone, not in a state of loneliness or social exile, but in a condition of internal independence. Their solitude is intentional, functional, and deeply rooted in self-direction. They do not orbit social circles for validation, nor do they constantly measure themselves against the progress, status, or opinions of others. This absence of comparison protects them from envy, insecurity, and distraction, but it also removes a crucial mechanism through which greatness is often recognized. Human perception is contrast-based. We understand strength by witnessing weakness, clarity by observing confusion, and competence by seeing others struggle with tasks we perform effortlessly. The Sigma man's lifestyle minimizes this exposure. He works quietly, often behind closed doors. He thinks privately, refining ideas without external noise. He moves independently, detached from group momentum and collective identity. As a result, he rarely witnesses the friction others experience when facing the same challenges. He does not see how rare his calm under pressure is, how uncommon his self-discipline appears, or how unusual his mental resilience truly is. Without frequent interaction, he lacks comparative data. In solitude, standards become abstract rather than relative. Effort feels normal because it is consistent. Capability feels ordinary because it is familiar. Without mirrors, self-perception flattens. The Sigma man does not think in terms of hierarchy or exceptionality. He sees himself simply as functional, capable, and self-reliant. This is not humility in the moral or philosophical sense. It is a perceptual limitation created by isolation. Excellence, when experienced daily and privately, loses its emotional signal. Mastery becomes routine. Strength becomes baseline. What others would label impressive, he experiences as necessary. Solitude sharpens skill because it allows uninterrupted focus, deep work, and internal alignment. But it dulls recognition because there is no external contrast to highlight rarity. The Sigma man does not underestimate himself out of insecurity. He underestimates himself because his environment provides no feedback loop. In a quiet world of self-contained standards, even exceptional capacity can feel neutral, unremarkable, and simply sufficient. Point 6, they confuse humility with smallness. The final reason Sigma men fail to see their own greatness lies in a subtle but powerful misinterpretation, the conflation of humility with smallness. True humility has never meant the denial of strength. It means the absence of vanity. Yet many Sigma men internalize restraint so deeply that they unconsciously shrink themselves, not outwardly but internally. They downplay their authority in conversations, assume their influence is accidental rather than earned, and treat their presence as replaceable even when situations consistently stabilize, sharpen, or improve because they are there. This is not insecurity, and it is not low self-worth. It is the natural outcome of a man who operates without ego dependency. Sigma men do not require validation to function. They do not measure themselves through applause, hierarchy, or recognition. They move based on internal alignment rather than external reward. However, this very independence can create a blind spot. When value is never asserted, not even privately, it can slowly fade from conscious awareness. The mind begins to normalize excellence as baseline behavior. What others would label leadership, discipline, or rare composure, the Sigma man simply labels as what needs to be done. Over time, quiet power that is never acknowledged, even internally, can begin to feel weightless, almost invisible. Yet quiet does not mean weak, and unseen does not mean insignificant. The Sigma man's presence often alters dynamics without force. Rooms settle, conversations sharpen, decisions gain clarity. But because these effects are subtle, they are easy for the Sigma himself to overlook. He is too focused on function to notice impact. The challenge, then, is not to become louder, more performative, or more visible. It is not to chase recognition or to narrate one's value to the world. The challenge is far simpler and far more internal. To recognize that restraint is not self-erasure, that humility does not require self-denial, that silence does not cancel strength. A Sigma man does not need to announce his greatness, but he must quietly acknowledge it within himself, not to inflate the ego, but to maintain clarity. Greatness that is unrecognized internally can lead to underplacement, overtolerance, and unnecessary self-sacrifice. Recognizing your weight does not make you arrogant, it makes you accurate. And accuracy is essential for a man who moves through the world deliberately, sparingly, and with purpose. The closing truth is simple and unemotional. If you are a Sigma man who feels ordinary despite carrying discipline, stability, and depth, this is not a flaw. It is the natural consequence of internal orientation. When your attention is trained inward, you don't experience your own growth as a performance. You experience it as a quiet baseline, the way a strong foundation feels normal to the person who lives on it every day. Greatness that grows inward feels calm, not dramatic, stable, not intoxicating, ordinary, not inflated, because it is built through repetition, restraint, and long-term standards rather than applause. This is why your progress can feel invisible to you while it quietly reshapes your entire life. Your patience, your choices, your boundaries, and your ability to stay steady when others panic. And that is precisely why it endures. Your task is not to announce it and not to doubt it when it doesn't feel impressive, but to continue refining it in small, consistent ways, while allowing yourself occasionally to acknowledge the structure you have already built, quietly, deliberately, without needing validation, without needing anyone to witness it, and without turning your strength into noise.